I'm very pleased to be joined today by April White, joining us all the way from sunny California. It's a bitterly cold day here in the UK. We haven't seen the sun in about a week.
Oh,
What's
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you only visit in the summer. You're very lucky. Or
Actually, I'm there every winter.
no
So,
way.
yes. Yeah,
What?
this year notwithstanding. Actually, I'll be there in February. I have a book event in London in February.
Oh, excellent.
So,
Where can people go to meet you before we lose this thread?
that will be, it's the Rare event. So, Romance Authors Readers event. And I have managed to put myself on the fringe of that because I have a romantic element in my stories.
Yeah,
But I think that most of the best stories in the world have some element that is hopeful and romantic. But I've managed to find myself in among some phenomenal authors who do participate in these European events about once a year. I was in Berlin last year for a Rare event, and I'm lucky enough to be in London in February, on February 25th, around Olympia, but it's RARE is a way
RA.
to find it.
Okay, RARE in February, and
Yes.
yeah, I'm sure people will be able to find that. Because you've got actually quite a big fan club over in the UK. I was looking at some of your reviews today, and people really love it. So
Thank you.
so you published book one, which
Mhm.
in the Immortal Descendants series, which is marking time. You published that, I think, was it January 2015, somewhere around about there, or a
No,
bit
that was
before
my,
that?
no, the first book was November 2012. So right around this time, 5 years ago. And from then, it was another year and a half until I had the confidence to actually finish book two, because with book one, it's sort of like, oh, was that a fluke? Was it actually as good as I think it was? And then book three was much faster. That was 6 months to write. And four and five were about a year each. But the series is complete now, with
Yeah,
the last book just came out in January of this year.
yeah. And that, I mean, that's you've won an award as well. I see for book
Yeah,
one.
for marking time, I won the 2016 Library Journal Award for indie young adult. And when I first started writing the book, I thought I was writing a young adult novel because my heroine is 17 at the beginning. And as I paid attention to who was reading the books, I realized I was writing for primarily women, but for people who read the stuff that I read, because I wrote it for myself. I wrote what I wanted to read. And when people ask, when other authors ask, or aspiring authors ask, well, do you have any advice for any authors? It would always be write what you want to read, because you will be reading it approximately 1,652 times.
That's a low number.
Right?
You'll
I
also be
just,
listening to the audiobook too, several times over whilst reading the text.
yeah, while doing my taxes, I once did that, listening to check the audiobook files as I was doing taxes. It wasn't pleasant.
Yeah. So what was it that attracted you to time travel as a genre?
I have always loved history. I've loved it since I was a kid. And I read Outlander when it first came out, so 25 years ago,
Yeah.
and could not understand why they kept putting that in the romance category. I thought that it belonged in time travel fantasy or historical fiction, something of that variety, because it's so beautifully researched. Now I've lost whatever that the stigma that gets attached to romance. I've lost that stigma. So now it's like, well, of course, there's a romantic element. It belongs in all of these different categories, because cross genre is, that's how books are written. You're never just one category. You're writing about people, or you're writing about history, or whatever it is. So having a historical element, and then taking a modern character and putting her, like fish out of water stories, taking her out of her comfort zone and putting her someplace that she has no experience, and the only way she can survive is just to learn very quickly and use her people skills. So it requires an instant adjustment, and there's so much fodder for what can go wrong. What could possibly go wrong in Elizabethan England when you have to wear skirts and you're used to wearing jeans and combat boots? Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. And what made you choose the eras that you chose? Was it a particular interest in those eras?
Yes, and some of them were accidental. So absolutely, Jack the Ripper, give me a historical mystery, I'm in heaven. So the Jack the Ripper mystery, when I first started writing Marking Time, I didn't know as much as I know now about for example, Scotland Yard's Black Museum.
Yeah.
I didn't know that that existed until about 2 years after I'd published. And I have a friend who's former Scotland Yard, and he told me about the museum, and he said, we've actually known who Jack the Ripper was for about 15 years because the DNA evidence had been tested. They still had pieces of evidence in the Black Museum. They had run DNA tests in maybe the mid 80s, and so they knew. And I thought that was fascinating to find out after. I certainly would have written a different book, but I love historical mysteries. And I love the second book is set in Tudor England when Princess Elizabeth was a prisoner in the Tower of London. I knew I wanted to write something about Elizabeth. I love the strong women of history. I think that to be written into history as a woman means that you must have been extraordinary, because the losers never write the histories. And the ideas about women at the time, not so very liberal. So I find it remarkable when a woman figures prominently in history or in historical texts. I didn't know that Elizabeth Tudor almost died in the prison. The 2 months that she spent as a prisoner of her sister in the Tower of London, sorry, ignore it. The phone.
That's okay.
There was an order given to the warder, the Lord Warder of the Tower, and it was an execution. So it was demand for execution, but it wasn't signed by the Queen. And he realized it was put forward by one of Mary's ministers, and he realized that if he, sorry,
It's all right. It could be a Hollywood producer wanting the rights to your movie.
Or it could be my neighbor saying, I'm going someplace, and if you need anything. If he had followed through with that order to execute, he realized it could go very badly for himself because it wasn't signed by the Queen. Blame would fall on him. And so he decided not to, but they were already building the scaffolding. And, she very nearly died one night in the Tower and wouldn't have been, arguably England's greatest queen.
I mean, that's fascinating. I didn't know that, because there's an interesting thing that Elizabeth was absolutely livid. I discovered there's a great series about Elizabeth's Secret Service, just been on TV here, saying that she was absolutely livid that Mary's execution was carried out. She hadn't wanted that. So
she had not.
So that must have reminded her very, very closely of that time in the Tower when she was nearly killed.
So if you've ever seen the Armada portrait of Elizabeth, she's wearing these 6-strand, beautiful opera-length black pearls.
Yep.
Those were Mary Stuart's pearls that she bought from her for 12,000 crowns. And it was obviously undervalued. She got a great deal, but those pearls have gone missing. I don't know where they are. I could not find anything about them. It doesn't appear that they are in the current Queen's Royal Collection. It may be that they were broken apart when Cromwell seized all of the treasures, but there's no record of them anywhere. When I was doing research at the Tower, I found that I knew considerably more about some things than many of the yeoman warder did. And for example, in the crown jewels section, I was asking after the pearls, and they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. These,
Wow.
they're not part of this collection for sure, and they had no record of them. But
Well,
that,
that's your next big historical mystery.
no,
It's got
it's
to
part
be.
of book two, but it's fun. I that's the kind of stuff that I end up down 3 day old, 3 days of rabbit holes trying to figure out where did this go, what happened to this. That's how I discovered the Whitehall cellars that still exist under the Department or the Ministry of Defense. Just things like that fascinate me. So um, a lot of the history in my books is accidental, and it's the product of doing research for something that I thought I wanted to write about. Uh, Book three is set during the time of Joan of Arc. I had no interest in writing about Joan of Arc, but it naturally fit 125 years, which is the length of my time hops, if you will.
Yeah.
It naturally fit that from Tudor England. So I went back 125 years, and there's 1428. That's the Battle of Orleans and Joan of Arc. And when I'm dealing with a supernatural element of these five immortals, time, fate, nature, war, and death, it made perfect sense that Joan of Arc would be a descendant of fate. Those are the seers. Of course she would be. But it was fun to also make her a mix with a descendant of nature who is a shifter. So she turns into a wolf. And I got to play with the wolves of Paris, which is slightly off time. That was 1450. But in 1450, there was this pack of wolves that had breached the city walls and was terrorizing Paris because it was a really hard winter. And they were ultimately killed on the steps of Notre Dame. And, they were led by this wolf that was nicknamed Cortot. But how
I
does
didn't
that?
know that.
I know,
That's
it's fun
fascinating.
stuff.
That is really fascinating.
So I just blended my stories because not so many people know that much about the 1400s, and being able to play with some things in France about that. That was fun.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually brought up something there that I did want to talk about. It's that it's not just that there is a romance element in your novels. There is also a great deal more. I wasn't going to do a big thing in case I spoiled it for people, but there are so many different elements, and I think kind of underlying all of that, and the reason you're so successful is because I think you touch on that sense of difference and alienation that each of us feels. And I think we feel it most when we're, I guess, in our teens and going through puberty and trying to find out who in the world we are. And
Hmm.
I think that's you do this exceptionally well, and you do
Thank you.
the hankering, that hankering after someone. I mean, I think I can't think of a man doing that as well, writing that as well as a woman can, to be honest. I can't, you do all of these things really beautifully, and you
Thank
bring
you.
it all together. But what I think is important is they're thrillers and they're mysteries. So you've got several elements,
Right.
several genres coming together in this really good mix.
Thank you. It is why I dislike the Amazon categories,
Yeah.
if you will, because that's really boxy. And my favorite books bring in all of those elements. They bring in some history. They absolutely have interpersonal relationships and strong characters.
Yes.
Because to me, I have a lot of plot in my books because that's interesting, but I want to know those people. I want to hang out with those people.
Yeah.
And, I've picked up books that are bestsellers that I put right back down again because I don't like the people. I don't want to spend the next 3 days reading about people that I don't like.
Well, the
So,
other
and
thing is that plot must be driven by character.
yes,
If you don't have a decent character in the plot, if it's a wooden character, then, well, who are you reading? You're reading Dan Brown, and well, I guess
right.
some people like that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
probably not going to last. I don't think beyond his lifetime. I'm going to
I
guess.
will never disparage another author.
I'm being bitchy, I know, but I know what I like and I know why I like it.
Right.
But good stories start with characters we can relate to and who are human, and or not necessarily human in your case,
Everybody's
but
human.
we can relate
Everybody's
to,
human.
who have
Yep.
emotions and who are real people and who are vulnerable, and that we can
Well,
relate to on a human level.
it's always write what you know, right?
Yeah,
That's why my kids have featured in my books. My dog is in my book. It's very easy to pull human characteristics from people that I know and play with them, but also really I write in first person. So getting inside my character's head, I have to know her and I have to believe her.
yeah.
I'm right now, I just finished the first book of a new series that spins off.
I'm very sorry about that. We had a technical issue and we lost the sound with April for the last 2 or 3 minutes of the interview. She was just going on to talk about her latest set of novellas, which will be coming out in January. They're about Ringo. It's a spin-off series about Ringo, who is one of the characters from the Immortal Descendants series. He's I guess you would call him a cheeky Cockney urchin type, highly intelligent, a lot of street smarts, very, very resourceful. And that looks like being a really fantastic and fun series of novellas. So we're really looking forward to that. You can subscribe to April's newsletter at aprilwhitebooks.com. That should be just coming out at the bottom of your screen there. You can go and see her at the Rare Events in London, 21st to the 25th of February next year, 2018. So make an effort and go and see her there. She's an absolutely wonderful person. A real pleasure to interview with her. She is an absolute stickler for historical detail, by the way. Before the interview, we had a tremendously interesting chat about the early development of hydroelectricity, which is something I know a little bit about. And I've been around a house, which was the very first electrically lit and powered house in the whole world. I did that when I was 10 or 12 years old, and April is itching to go and see that. That's up in the northeast of England. Okay, so look out for April's new series. You can get the first book of the Immortal Descendants, Marking Time. You can get that for free from Amazon. So go to Amazon, April White, Marking Time, download that for free, read it, and crack on with that series.
And just a reminder, you can sign up to April's newsletter at aprilwhitebooks.com, and you can see her at Rare Events. That's in London from the 21st to the 25th of February 2018.